Okay, so good day everyone. We are done with lesson 1 of chapter 4, which is the introduction or introducing you to your hypothesis, and that is your null and your alternative hypothesis. This time, what could be the possible errors if we will going to commit a mistake of accepting our null or rejecting our null hypothesis, whether they are true or false. Okay, so that is being discussed in your lesson 2, and this chapter talks about the types of error that possibly we could commit when we are making our conclusion, which involves our accepting or rejecting our null hypothesis. Okay, so there are two types of error. Okay, so when we say lesson 2 that talks about types of error, statistical test, and level of significance. So in making conclusion, a sample data should be gathered and used to infer whether there is a sufficient evidence. In rejecting the null hypothesis, which lead to two different inferences. So the first one is accept the alternative hypothesis because of the sufficient evidence in the data that rejects the null hypothesis, meaning this is the part where the null hypothesis is already proven false. For number 2, accept the null hypothesis because of the insufficient evidence in the data. Okay, so take note what we mean by insufficient evidence in the data is the process of proving or testing your null hypothesis, proving it false. So if there is no insufficient evidence that the null hypothesis is false, then what we do or what we're going to do is that we need to accept that the null hypothesis is true. So in deciding whether to reject or accept the null hypothesis based on a sample data, a statistical test of hypothesis must be conducted. So statistical test. Okay, so when we say statistical test, that is what we call the method or tool used to decide whether or not to reject a statistical hypothesis. So we have this one-tailed and two-tailed test. These are classification of statistical tests. So when we say one-tailed, okay, remember your normal distribution. Okay, so when we say one-tailed, that only indicates either the right tail or the left tail. Okay, so we are using this one when an alternative hypothesis is directional. So again, your left tail talks about your less than, and your right tail talks about your greater than or more than. Okay, so in a two-tailed test, this one is what we call the directional test. Okay, so take note, when it is directional, that is a two-tailed test, we are using or doing the two-tailed test. When it is directional, it is one-tailed. Okay, again, one-tailed for directional and two-tailed for non-directional. Okay, and take note that one-tailed is given by the symbol greater than or less than, and two-tailed test is given by the symbol equal to, not equal to. So in conducting statistical tests, there are 4 possible outcomes in making a decision. So here are the outcomes. So for example, number 1, the first one is do not reject the hypothesis, the null hypothesis. So if the null hypothesis is true, you make a correct decision. But if the null hypothesis is false and you accept or you do not reject the null hypothesis, then you are actually committing a type 2 error. So when we say type 2, we will going to make it simple. Type 2 error. Okay, so what is type 2 error? That's the question. Okay, we will going to erase that one. Type 2, type 2 error. Okay, so when we say type 2 error, that is accepting or do not rejecting, accepting false, actually it will not go into false HO. Okay, how about the type 1 error? Okay, no, the next decision that we could make in using your null hypothesis is, of course, if we can accept the null hypothesis, there is also rejecting the null hypothesis. Okay, so when we are rejecting the null hypothesis, and in fact that the null hypothesis is true, then we are making a type 1 error when rejecting your true HO, or rejecting the true null hypothesis. Okay, so we will going to have some I call that we will going to have some example statement which shows that if these are easy statement which in fact we can make either to accept or to reject your null hypothesis. Okay, the first one, so hypothesis testing is similar to court trial, whether the defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty. Okay, so one, what you're going to do is formulate the null and alternative hypothesis. This is the process in hypothesis testing. Okay, so for example, so the defendant is innocent. That is based on our first statement. Okay, court trial where defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty. Okay, unless, because we do hearing to know whether he is really innocent or guilty. But otherwise, remember that unless proven guilty, the defendant or whoever serve as the suspect is considered to be an innocent one. Okay, so now we will going to have our null hypothesis. Again, the defendant is innocent unless proven guilty. So the first statement is that the defendant is innocent. Meaning when we have the first data, or the first gathered data, is what we call your null hypothesis. So in this statement, this only means that the defendant is known to be as an innocent person. If the defendant is not innocent, we will going to have an alternative, or proven to be not innocent. Then the alternative for that is the defendant is not innocent, and we will going to rephrase the word not innocent. That means your alternative statement is the defendant is guilty. So we have here, for number 2, the type 1 error will be committed when the defendant is judged guilty when in fact he did not commit any crime. Okay, so a type 2 error will be committed when the defendant is judged not guilty when in fact he committed a crime. Okay, do you get the point? Okay, so again, reject null hypothesis, reject HO, which is, okay, we will going to start with accept. Let's have the accept first. Accept HO, which is actually false. That is your, let's have a review for that. Okay, accept HO when in fact it is false. Okay, that is your type 2 error. This is your type 2 error. Okay, and reject. Okay, HO, which is true. Hindi siya. He doesn't want to write there. Reject HO, which is actually true, and we are committing oh sorry we are committing a type 1 error. Okay, so going back here, take note. So a type 1 error is committed when the defendant is judged guilty. Well, in fact, he did not commit any crime. So we have proven that your null hypothesis, which is the defendant is innocent, true, but you sentence him to be guilty. So that only means that we are committing type 1 error because again, your defendant is not proven guilty, but still he was being judged as guilty. Okay? For the type 2 error, okay, the defendant is actually guilty. He was proven guilty, but still we accept your we accept the null hypothesis, which is the defendant is innocent. So in this case, when you sentence or when you accepted that the defendant or your null hypothesis, which is the defendant is innocent, well, in fact he was proven guilty, then what we are committing is type 2 error. Okay, so we will just going to have that. Um, let's have that for a while. Okay. So let's reiterate that one, or we have another example here. So John says that he is not bald. Okay, bald. He just make an excuse that his hairline is just receding. So when we say the word receding, what happened there is that your hair becomes disappearing from your forehead. So John action may be to find remedial measures to stop falling hair. Okay, the question will be is that what type of error is John committing an error? Of course, because our null hypothesis here is that John is actually bald. Okay, but he is in denial. Okay, and he just make an excuse, or he is not accepting our null hypothesis here. Your issue here is John is bald. Okay. Okay, so John is bald, and your alternative here, because we will going to make an alternative, John is not bald. Okay, so as you can see, we have already proven that John is bald because again, his hairline is already receding. So a receding hairline indicates that you are going bald or you are bald already. Okay, so that means John is rejecting the truth that he is bald, and he is rejecting the null hypothesis that he is bald. So that only means, again, going back, that only means he is rejecting the null hypothesis, which is actually true, and he is committing a type 1 error. Okay? Okay, so we have here level of significance. So a level of significance is actually denoted by it was not refreshed, but it is already saved, denoted by alpha. Okay, so the probability of committing type 1 error is denoted by what we called alpha. So the probability of committing a type 1 error is denoted by the Greek alpha, which is given by A, okay, is equal to probability, which is represented by capital letter T, and of course your type 1 error. Okay, while the probability of committing type 2 error is given by your beta. This is, we are already using symbol here. Type 2 error. Okay, so probability of committing errors depends on this table. So reject a true null hypothesis. Of course, we are having the what we call type 1 error, and that probability of committing type 1 error is given by the symbol alpha, and accepting a false hypothesis is given by type 2 error, and that is given by the probability of committing error denoted by beta. Okay, now researchers should ensure that these errors are small. So the most frequently used probability values for alpha, take note, are set to 0.05, which is given by that is your level of significance. Okay, level of significance, we are using this one actually in your quantitative research commonly, that is 0.05, which also indicates your 95% confidence. Okay, and 0.01, which is denoted by your 99% confidence level. Okay, so researchers should also ensure that this is small. Okay, the probability assigned to each depends on its seriousness. The more serious the error, the less it will occur, and serious error, a level of significance is set to. The more we increase the sample size, the more we reduce the probability of committing the error. Because what's the idea behind? Because as you can see, as you cover the entire population, that only means you're becoming nearer and nearer to your true value, which is taken in our population. So we have here another video which also serve as your reference in learning more about type 1 and type 2 error. Okay, so good day everyone, and I hope you learned something. Goodbye.